Hi, I'm Annie Fitzsimmons. I'm your Washington Realtors Legal Hotline lawyer. And in this episode, I want to answer a question that has developed since the forms revisions were introduced in July of 2025 to incorporate a required disclosure of a referral fee that broker must pay to a referring real estate firm when the broker enters an agency agreement with the buyer or with the seller. So July 2025, a new provision was added to both the statewide forms listing agreement and the buyer brokerage services agreement, Form 41, to require that brokers disclose to the consumer when the broker has an obligation to pay a referral fee as part of that consumer's real estate transaction. The consumer must consent to the broker's payment of that referral fee as part of the language of both the listing agreement and the buyer brokerage services agreement. So the question that has come is, do we have to make that disclosure if the referral all happens within the same firm? So let's create a set of facts here. I am a listing broker. I receive a phone call from an unrepresented buyer who wants to see my listing. I show the listing. I recommend to the buyer that they should have their own representation. The buyer says, I think that's a great idea. Can you refer a broker to me? And I say, sure. The buyer has already expressed an interest now in purchasing my seller's listing. And I refer the buyer to Fred Smith, another broker in my office. So Fred and I are both licensed to the same firm. When the buyer enters a brokerage services agreement with Fred, Fred is going to disclose to the buyer that Fred is paying a referral fee to me. And I, as the listing broker, am going to deliver a Form 42C, paragraph 3, to the seller, letting the seller know that if Fred's buyer purchases seller's property, then I, as a listing broker, will receive the listing fee as well as compensation from the buyer brokerage side of the transaction. I'm going to receive a referral fee from Fred. And so the question is, I understand that that's important if the referral fee is being paid from a different firm. Let's say it's a firm from out of state or from the other side of from the other side of the state. But even if it's within the firm, because compensation just comes to my company and then my company pays it this way, why would I have to disclose that if I'm the listing broker, I'm getting compensation from the buyer broker side and vice versa, if it's all within the same firm? And the answer is because Washington law requires that. Washington law requires that the consumer, consents to the sharing of compensation between firms and parties. And so in this set of facts, we have a referral fee being paid from buyer broker to listing broker. And I understand that it's really buyer brokerage. That's a true statement. It's buyer brokerage sharing compensation with a listing brokerage. And in reality, that's one single firm, because the law requires that the consumer be given the opportunity to consent whenever transaction is shared across the transaction between the firms or between the parties. And so really that's the easiest way to view it, is anytime compensation is being shared across the transaction from buyer to seller or seller to buyer side, even if it's in the same firm, disclosure must be made to the consumers. So then the follow-on question is this. Well, in my firm, I owe compensation on a portion of my compensation on every single transaction to my team leader, or I pay a portion of my compensation to my licensed assistant on every transaction. Do I have to disclose that to the consumer? And the answer is no, because the team lead, to the extent they represent somebody, they represent your client. The licensed assistant, they represent your client. You have not changed the side of the transaction. And so instead, the consumer simply knows that X amount of dollars are being paid to your firm. What your firm does with that compensation is up to your firm. It's not up to the consumer. And the firm does not have to disclose the portion they're going to pay to you or any portion they might pay to your team lead or your assistant. That is different from the scenario where the seller, for example, has agreed to pay you 5 apples compensation. And they're going to pay you 5 apples compensation, but in addition, you're also going to get 1 apple of compensation from the buyer broker side of the transaction. So in this transaction, even though it's all in-house, listing broker is not going to get the 5 apples that seller knows listing broker is getting. Instead, listing broker and listing firm are going to get the 5 apples plus 1 more apple from the buyer broker side of the transaction. That's why the disclosure has to be made across the transaction, but not if all of the funds stay on the same side of the transaction. If you have questions on this or anything else, please visit warealtor.org, follow the links to the Legal Hotline, and ask me a question. Thank you for being a Washington Realtors member.